Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. Great article here from T-Mobile's newsroom. This is an older article. I'll leave a link to it in the description in case some of you haven't seen it. So in a video not too long ago, I talked about the regulatory environment moving forward now that we have a new administration moving in, and that the M&A space, for those of you who don't know what M&A stands for, merger and acquisition, that space is going to heat up. But prior to that even heating up, we have several carriers, two of them in particular, that are trying to get some pretty big deals across the finish line. The Frontier Verizon deal, we talked about that. We talked about that earlier. I brought up that map again. That deal is going through a regulatory process now, waiting to gain approval. And then we got T-Mobile. We got T-Mobile already, even before this new administration takes place, pretty heavily involved in the M&A space. They're looking to gain approval to acquire US Cellular, expected to get that in the first half of 2025. The expected approval is in the first half of 2025. But T-Mobile is also involved in two other acquisitions, if you will. They're not buying out the entire company, but they want about 50% stake, and that's the Lumos and Metronet. Those two deals, they're looking to get approval for those two. So T-Mobile is heavily involved in the M&A space, and that's why I kind of point towards that again to show you guys this is not just something that we're pulling out of the left field. No, this is actually T-Mobile making these moves, right? We've seen that and this is. Usually you can go by the history of the company to kind of see how they're going to move forward and what type of strategy they're going to choose. And what's one thing that we've seen T-Mobile do over and over again? Merger and acquisitions. We have seen them heavily involved in that space over the years, right? Starting with Metro PCS, then you got Iowa Wireless. They bought several other smaller players. They were heavily involved in acquisitions of Spectrum, Band 12, 600. Then they got Sprint. Then they got more Spectrum throughout that time frame post-merger. And now they're going at it again. And I fully expect T-Mobile to continue going down the M&A path, especially now with a Republican administration. I don't want to point towards what they might buy. I think it's going to be heavily leaned towards fiber, the JV players, but don't rule out of question another wireless acquisition. It's possible. We got Viero, we got C-Spire, we got several others that have some valuable assets that T-Mobile might engage in. It's very possible. That's something that they do, right? AT&T and Verizon do it too, but they haven't done it as consistently, I'd say, as how many times as T-Mobile has been in front of the regulatory bodies. AT&T really hasn't done anything major in the M&A space since DirecTV and Time Warner. They haven't done anything like super, super big. I guess you can say they got the FirstNet contract. That's not really part of M&A. But outside of that, the only other acquisition that they've made is the C-band and DoD spectrum. But they haven't tried to acquire like a company, right? They haven't tried to acquire another regional carrier. They haven't really been involved in the M&A space in fiber neither, which is what I expected them to be a bit more aggressive in. I know they have deals with JV players now, and they got BlackRock, and that's good, but they haven't really been engaged much in the M&A space on the wireless side. So maybe that's also a sign that AT&T might go for a company or two during this administration. Very possible. Verizon, I mean, as I stated, they're currently involved in probably the biggest deal that Verizon has been in since quite a long time from a M&A perspective. I can't think of another deal that's as big as this one in recent times. Maybe TracFone. I guess you can put that one in that category, but I don't know if the TracFone purchase was as expensive as this deal that they're trying to get across the finish line. It's still a total of $20 billion. Yes, it's 9.6 in cash, but the other 11.4, the debt that they're adding onto the balance sheet, it's still a total of $20 billion. So it's a pretty significant size of a deal. And in one approval, they're gaining a ton of additional home broadband footprint that they otherwise wouldn't have had or would have taken years to accomplish to get to that type of footprint, maybe even decades. So it seems T-Mobile is the most interested in the M&A space, just going by what we've seen, what we've been hearing, what they're actually putting into motion, right? It's not speculation. We've seen all the deals that they've struck over the years. Columbia Capital, more 600, more Spectrum, Sprint, Metro, Iowa Wireless, I think Swiftel. I forgot the name of the other company out in West Virginia, but I guess we can put that under Sprint, because that was also part of the Sprint deal. So T-Mobile, the most aggressive, I would say, up until this point in the M&A space. Maybe not the size of deals, because we know AT&T wins that one outright. AT&T's DirecTV and Time Warner deal, insanely huge in size. I mean, we're talking between the two, maybe like 160, 170 billion or something like that. So yeah, even Verizon isn't anywhere close to that in terms of the size of the deal in the M&A space. And T-Mobile isn't either, right? Even if you total everything up, they probably don't get anywhere close to what AT&T spent on those two media deals. That will go down probably in the wireless space like 20 years from now, as we discussed that. That will still go down as probably one of the biggest acquisition fails ever, in terms of the size of the deal, going through the regulatory process, having to get it approved, and then just to sell it again because they couldn't get it. It didn't fit into the strategy of where they wanted to go. Leadership change, and then boom, all of a sudden it's a totally different direction. So I don't see that being the case for T-Mobile. All of these assets that they're acquiring are needed for them to prosper and continue to grow in the wireless space. So even if there's a leadership change, I don't see them all of a sudden saying, hey, we're gonna sell these US Cellular assets after we just got them. That's not gonna happen. Simply not the case. They're going to be an added help for the success of the company. These tower sites, they're gaining like 2,100 from US Cellular. That's a big deal for T-Mobile's rural coverage, especially across that US Cellular footprint. It's going to be great for the T-Mobile customer to have that added footprint. But just wanted to talk about that in this video. The two companies right now that are going through some of the bigger M&A deals, it's clearly Verizon and T-Mobile. But if I had to pick one or the other, who's the most aggressive in that space right now and who'd be willing to do additional deals, it's T-Mobile. It's clearly T-Mobile. Outside of that Frontier deal, as lengthy of a process as that's going to be to get the approval, which is expected in the first quarter of 2026, and taking on an additional $11 billion of debt, I don't see Verizon doing much more outside of that. They weren't really involved much in the M&A space. They dropped a ton of money on C-band. That was a huge acquisition cost. And, that didn't really make them too flexible to really go big on any other companies. Outside of Frontier, I think the Frontier is a good deal. It will increase their debt. It will increase the leveraging point, I think, to like maybe a 2.8. But I think by the time this deal gets approved, that they can further pay down some more debt to not let that leverage get out of hand. And so I think they have some positive momentum in that regard. But I don't see Verizon all of a sudden, once this deal is closed, approved, they have to go through an integration process, which is probably going to exceed a year. I don't see them all of a sudden just letting loose, hey, we're going to buy this, we're going to get this, we're going to get this. I think they're going to be opportunistic. I think they're going to look, but I think what most of them are more interested in than anything is spectrum. From an acquisition perspective, that's what they're going to be looking forward to. T-Mobile still has to grow its size and scale. So it's a different ballgame for T-Mobile still, even after the Sprint merger, even after investing $40 billion into the network post-merger, the first 3 years, they still have the obligation to really grow and scale the network. And the US Cellular deal will help with that, because that's territory that they are less advanced in. But Verizon's very mature. Verizon is seasoned. The C-band deployment is going well for them very quickly. So they're not looking to buy or, all of a sudden just go on a spree. If it makes sense, it makes sense. But the Frontier deal, it clearly made sense. Now it's all about spectrum. What's in the pipeline? Can we, deleverage? Can we get our money together so we can go big on 3.1 or whatever the FCC releases next? And that's the same for AT&T. They're already crying about spectrum, so they're also probably ready for another huge auction to come up and spend money. And then T-Mobile has to be on the lookout for that too. Yes, I want them to be aggressive in the M&A space because they still have to grow the size and the scale of the network. But they also have to look at, okay, we have $20 billion set aside for flexible spending. The US Cellular, all these other assets we're gaining, that's already funded. But we have to be ready for a bidding war. If 3.1 does become available, whatever the FCC sets out, we have to be ready. We have to be ready to get a good chunk, maybe the biggest chunk, whatever they see fit. And they have to be able to invest into that to get that chunk of spec or secure that chunk of spectrum. And that's going to be for all three. So I think from looking at it to close out the video from a bigger perspective, because spectrum is what fuels the wireless industry. From an acquisition perspective, I think another spectrum auction is really it's really gonna be a fight. It's gonna be a really competitive fight, and they're gonna kill each other for it. I'll just be honest. So that has to be taken into consideration as they're moving forward. Even T-Mobile, they got to say, hey, look, we're on our way to doing $19 billion of free cash flow, but we have to be ready to put even more money aside in case that spectrum auction comes up quicker than we anticipate, and we need to be able to beat out, our biggest two competitors, the threat, right? We have to get, if we're continuing to grow the way that we've been growing, if we're continuing to grow our share in the top 100 markets, we have to be ready at any time to get the biggest chunk of spectrum, maybe out of all the carriers, to further fuel our growth. That's quite possible. They have the credit rating now to go bigger in the debt market. They don't have anywhere close to the debt of Verizon and AT&T. So the next spectrum auction could get very, very interesting now that we're discussing merger and acquisition in this video. So be on the lookout for it, right? We got 3.1, we got 6 gigahertz, 7 gigahertz, 12, 13, all that is in the pipeline. It's not officially scheduled to be auctioned off yet, but that's all in the works behind the scenes. All of that spectrum is accessible if the FCC gets its act together and starts getting that in motion. But they have stuff to auction off not a matter of if, it's got to be a when. We have to get more spectrum into the pipeline. There's no other alternative. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe if you're new. Follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Live. See y'all in the next one. Peace.